Hello students, today's agenda is to give you a great welcome to the new quarter. Today we're going to learn about slope-intercept equation and you will be able to do page 1. Today students will be able to write an equation in slope-intercept form given the slope and the y-intercept. And what is the slope? We have seen that the slope is represented by an m. For example, in y equals mx plus b, m is the slope. If we have 2 points, the formula to get the slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We also know it as the change on y over the change on x, or we also know it as rise over run. And finally, a picture that I use for rise is the sun, because if it's positive, it goes up to the sky. If it's negative, it goes down because it's of the sunset. And for run, I use somebody racing. For the y-intercept is the initial point, and it's also when x equals 0. So anytime you see 0 for x, then the value that you are given for y, that's your y-intercept or your initial point. Okay, knowing that information, now we can derive our equations, write an equation in slope-intercept form, and I just do kind of like a little rap. Y equals mx plus b. Y equals mx plus b. Y equals mx plus b. M is that slope, and b is the y-intercept. In Unit 3, we graphed these type of equations, and we're going to continue to graph them in the next unit, so that's why we need to know it. So for the y, we don't change anything. We just leave it as y. The m is the slope that they're giving us, so it's always the coefficient of x. So as you can see, y and x are staying the same. We're just replacing m, and we're replacing b. The y-intercept, which is b, is 4. Since it's positive, we put plus 4, because otherwise, if we don't put the plus, then it looks like you're multiplying. And in reality, b is always going to be a constant. It's going to be plus or minus, and a number with no variable. So that's all you have to do. This is your equation in slope-intercept form. Very simple. In here, the slope is -1/2, and the y-intercept is 4. So again, y equals mx plus b. The y stays the same. The slope is -1/4. No, 1/2. I saw the 4. So -1/2 x. You always include the y and the x. And the initial point or y-intercept is +4. So we put the +4. Don't forget the sign, okay? The +4. For number 3, it says that the slope is 0. So when that happens, you're going to have y equals, the slope will be 0x, but multiplying 0 times x is just 0. So the slope is 0x. And then in here, because we have -3, we put -3. We don't put the plus. Okay, only when it's positive we are going to put plus. However, when the slope is 0, when you multiply 0 times anything, either a variable or a number, the answer is going to be 0. So 0 minus 3 is just -3. Okay, or you can do the steps or just go and put -3. But if you need to see it, 0 times x is 0 minus 3. And the equation is 0 minus 3 is just -3. So for this equation, we don't have a slope basically, so that's why it makes the x disappear. But we learned that with this one, if you don't have an x, it doesn't touch x unless it's a 0. Okay? If you don't have an x when you're graphing, don't touch the x-axis. For the next one, number 4, y equals mx plus b. The y stays the same, the x stays the same. All you're replacing is m as the coefficient of x and b as a constant. So what is the slope, which is m? -5/7. -5/7. And the y-intercept is +0. In reality, we don't write it down when it's 0. Just like in here, we don't have a slope. or slope is 0, so it disappears basically, and it made the x disappear. In here, the only thing that we don't have is the constant. So we just have the equation y equals -5/7 of x. Okay, so this is our equation. Okay, for number 5, b, or y-intercept, is as is mentioned, where the line crosses the y-axis. So in here is this point right here. This is going to be my initial point or my y-intercept. So for my equation, I'm going to have my y equals the x, and I'm leaving a space for the slope, and then my initial point is going to be here. So what goes in here? Just that number, not the 0, but 5. Since it's positive, it's going to be +5 in here. How do I find the slope? I'm always going to go from the left point. I'm given 2 points. Okay, I'm going to find the slope. And it's always the change on y over the change on x. Always start on the left point. I'm pointing that out, okay? Always start on the left point. So knowing that, we're going to start on this point and then travel to this one. Always down or up first. Remember that on the numerator is the change on y. Because it's going from here to here, it's going down, we count how many spaces and it's going to be negative. So -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. So -6 for y. And then from here to here, we count how many spaces now to the right. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So it's +3 for x, okay? That's why it's the change on y over the change on x. If you remember, change on y over the change on x. And it's the same, rise and run. The rise is always up if it's positive or down if it's negative. Run is to the right if it's positive or to the left if it's negative. So in here is negative and positive. Now we can simplify that. -6 is divisible by 3. So negative divided by positive is negative, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So my equation in reality is going to be y equals, we divided this and that gives me -2. Whoops, I can't write in there. So let me write it down here in the other paper. So it's y equals -6 divided by 3 is -2 x, and then bring down the +5. So this is my equation for this graph. Okay, we're not given directly the slope, but we can find it by counting the spaces of how many spaces it takes for us to travel on y and how many spaces on x. For number 6, again, the initial point or y-intercept comes from the point that touches the y-axis. So in this case, it's 0, -1. So y equals the initial point, which is at the end, is -1, so I don't need the plus. You always put x as part of your equation, so y equals x is always there. You're just replacing the slope and the initial point or y-intercept. What is the y-intercept? That point. And it's only the y value, okay, -1. What is the slope? Let's count. Which one is farther to the left? That's where you start counting. And in both of these cases, it was on the y, but sometimes your point might be like somewhere over here, okay? Okay, so from here to here, how many spaces do I go on y? Again, is from here to here, is this many spaces on y, and these many spaces on x. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and since it's going up, it's positive. Okay, so +5, and then 1, 2, since it's going to the right is also positive, okay? So over 2. And 5 divided by 2, we're not going to simplify it as a mixed number. It always has to be a whole number or an improper fraction. It cannot be a mixed number. We always have the initial point, which is -1, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces up and 2 to the right. Something else that we learned in the previous lesson is that by looking at the line, when you have a negative slope from left to right, the line goes down. And when you have a positive slope from left to right, my line goes up. Negative slope, negative line. Positive slope, positive line. Okay, sometimes we're going to be given a table, and that's when we have to analyze. We said that the initial point or the y-intercept is always when x equals 0. So that's the easy way to find our b value. So in this case, we have this table with these values. And let me tell you that when we have x and f of x, the only difference is that y is written as f of x in our equation. I'm going to write them in both ways, but it's the same thing. Okay, so if we have y equals mx plus b, y equals mx plus b, the y and the x stay the same. What is the y-intercept? The y-intercept again is when x equals 0. That's the initial point, and we only get the value for y. That's my initial point right here. Let me write it in green. So since it's positive, we're going to put plus. If it was negative, we don't need to put the plus, okay? Just minus. What is the slope? This is how you're going to find your slope. Whichever is easier, you have to either decide going from here to here, choose 2 of the points, and then you're going to count the difference between the 2 points. For me, I noticed that it's easier if I count this way, or you can even count this one, but then you are going to have to simplify. So if I go from 2 to 5, so I'm going to go in that direction. Remember, this is the value, the same as the value of y. So that's why I'm going to count there first, because we need to find the change on y over the change on x. What is the change on y? For the slope, the change on y is just counting how many spaces from 2 to 5. Oh, you're adding 3. And then if I go in this direction, I have to go in the same direction. From 0 to 1 is just adding 1. So what is going to go in the numerator? The change on y, right? The change on y is positive 3. And what is the change on x? Is positive 1. So we divide 3 divided by 1 is 3. And bring down the x and put the plus 2. Again, if I put y equals 3x plus 2 or f of x equals 3x plus 2, is exactly the same thing. Okay, this is just written as a form of a function, but it's the same thing. Y and f of x, exactly the same thing. How did I get these values? Again, the 2 comes from the number that is next to the 0. So it's this 2 right here. The 3 is by counting how many spaces between any 2 points. But I have to choose the values of y first and then the values of x on the same points. Now, what if we had chosen this point and this point? Well, from 2 to 17, there is 15 spaces, right? From 2 to 17 is 15 spaces. And the same 2 points for x, these 2 points, so from 0 to 5 is 5. And if you divide that, 15 divided by 5 is 3. You will get the same thing for the slope, okay? The slope comes from counting the spaces between any 2 points. First, the values of y divided by the values of x, of those same points. Y equals mx plus b. But again, they want us to write it in function form. All they do is replace the y by f of x, but x stays the same. How do we find b? The initial point is always with 0. So if x is 0, then the b is in here is plus 3. How do we find the values of the slope? How many spaces from here to here? Oh, from 3 going to 1, that means that I subtracted 2. And from here to here, remember, if I go up, I have to go up in here. How many spaces from 0 to 1? Is just plus 1. If we put this in the numerator, it's negative 2 over positive 1. And negative 2 divided by positive 1 is negative 2. So that's my function. F of x equals negative 2x plus 3. Now, you don't have to graph in here, but it's just so that you can make the connection to the previous unit. So in here, the initial point is positive 3. Remember that the initial point is always on the y-axis. And then to graph, we do need the rise and run. So if it doesn't have a denominator, you put it over 1, which is why we have it here. And then it says, go down 2 spaces. That's the sun, if you remember. The sun goes up if it's positive or down if it's negative. 2 spaces, 1, 2, it's right there. But then you have to run, since it's positive, you're going to run to the right. So down 2 spaces and to the right 1 space, and that will be my graph, okay? The graph is not part of the lesson, and also I'm going to show you something else that is not part of the lesson, but I just want you to do a lot of connections. Notice how these points, 1, 1, 1, 1 is this point right here, 0, 3, 0, 3 is this point right here, and then we have negative 1, positive 5. Negative 1 would be in here for x, and positive 5 would be around here because you have 4, 5. So notice how these points can be found in that line if it's extended. Okay, with this we end our lesson. If you can please give us a thumbs up, subscribe around here. This is the link to the next 2 lessons related to this topic. Here you will find the next video. Now you're able to do page 1 and have fun.